What could you create if you spent 10 hours in your sketchbook? I recently did just that, and I'm going to be sharing why, my journey, my challenges, and all the art that I created in this video. Hey, welcome back to my channel. I make weekly art tutorials, paint-alongs and vlogs, and this video is super special because it is part of a collaboration with some other amazing YouTube artists, all of whom I will link down below. This wonderful YouTube artist called Miranda, who's behind Miranda Watson Alkali Creek Art, got in touch with me and some other YouTube artists, including Creating Cute Art, who you know I love, as well as Jude and Her Pencil, Made by Dawn, and so many more artists, to essentially ask if we would like to create art for 10 hours. Now, the rules are simple and you can take part in it too. They were essentially that we had to create art in one session or 2 sessions max. We could use a sketchbook of any size, using any medium and of any subject. It just had to be 10 hours. 10 hours. And of course, I took part in it. I recorded it and I wanted to share my experiences, the highs, the lows, the tips, the tricks, the everything that I got from this challenge in this video with you. So let me know which one of these paintings is your favorite and which one you'd like to have a longer video on, as I have a lot of footage of some great paintings. I'm also curious to know about what you think about the 10-hour challenge and all the topics that I'm going to be discussing in this video, so definitely hit me up in the comments. I will be waiting. In terms of the setup or the pre-preparation, it was twofold. One was trying to figure out what references I was going to use, and the other one was trying to figure out what materials I was going to use. So in terms of the materials, I thought that this would be a great opportunity to start using my Himi miya gouache again, especially because I have a lot of gouache and that set comes with a lot of paints, and I wanted something that was relatively affordable so that I could be low pressure about it and really mess around with the sketchbook and dedicate it to this challenge. Now, when it came to the sketchbook, for some reason I started overthinking it because I wanted a new sketchbook. I honestly thought I could finish a sketchbook in 10 hours. I'm not even gonna lie. And I brought out my collection, I analyzed them, and I wanted something that was relatively affordable, but I also wanted it to be quite good quality. I didn't want to get frustrated with the paper and thus not enjoy the challenge. This led me to the Sea White watercolor journal, which has 60 pages, 200 GSM. The texture looked nice. It's a true A5, which means it's slightly bigger than the Moleskine watercolor journal. I hadn't tried it before and I am trying to buy less, and thus I was like, I'm going to use what I have. So to start things off, I brought out my Roman Schmill watercolors, which I'm trying to get more familiar with and play around with, and I decided to start doing florals. Because I find them relaxing, I thought that it would be a nice way to jump in. I wasn't going to leave the first page empty, as is usually my custom. Let me know if you do that too. As you may know, I can find it quite daunting to do the first page, and thus I didn't want to really think about that or overdo it or do a fancy page. I just wanted to jump straight in with something that I knew I would enjoy, and thus I did some loose florals, which I thought maybe I would turn into an intro page, maybe not. But either way, it got some color on the first page and it helped me get over that very first hurdle. First painting went without a hitch. I really enjoyed it. Then I got into the second painting and again it was going well. And I think the first one took me maybe like 10 to 15 minutes. The second one took me maybe around 10 to 15 minutes again. So at this point I was like, oh, this is going to be an absolute breeze. I could do florals from today till tomorrow. I absolutely love them and this is going to be super easy. Disclaimer, it was not easy. It was not easy at all. Definitely worth it. I had a good time, but it wasn't easy. So following that, we get on to painting number 3. I decided that I wanted to try using the gouache, and I knew that I wanted to use gouache at some point, and now that I had kind of relaxed a little bit, I thought that it would be a good opportunity to use it. As I've mentioned in the past, I tend to have inspiration folders, just folders of pictures full of references and things that have inspired me that I have collected over time. And one of said folders had a collection of landscapes. And thus what I decided to do was use one of those folders for this challenge, so that if I got stuck or if I wanted a reference, I would use them and draw inspiration from them. And I can leave a link to the PDF down below in the description for you if you would also like to do the same. The reason that I was kind of in two minds about this at this point was I knew that if I did all landscapes, I would not finish the sketchbook. So part of me wanted to finish the sketchbook and thus thought that if I did florals, it would take me 15 minutes to start off with. Maybe I could get it down to even 8 minutes, 5 minutes, and I could finish these 60 pages without issue. Or the other thing would be to try and develop my skills, to try and develop my art, to push myself out of my comfort zone, and to know that I will not finish this sketchbook potentially, or to mix both of them and do a mix and match. So yes, I decided to start with the Himi gouache and do this nice loose landscape, not adding many details, but really focusing on the brush strokes, and to be perfectly honest, trying to get familiar with using the Himi gouache again. And following that, I was feeling good. I thought it was okay, not the best, but it's okay. It's the first landscape I've done. And thus I then moved to the second landscape. And this was a challenge. This was like a real challenge to do. And this is when I think it started getting hard. And this was the first hour. It was hard. I started dedicating so much time to it in comparison to the 15 minutes that I'd spent on the loose watercolor florals. And I wasn't that happy with the results. So I started overworking it and working it to try to get it to be to a place where I kind of liked it. Again, I was faced with a decision because I knew that I had a limited amount of time, and I knew that I would be showing this to you. And as much as I would like to say that I was able to kind of disregard that and just paint whatever I wanted, at the end of the day, I knew that this would be a video in the end, and thus I felt like I couldn't just paint complete trash. And that's why I think I dedicated so much time to it, even though I wasn't necessarily enjoying that painting as much. But in the end, I was happy with the results. It just took a lot of time to get to it. And it was time that I knew I wouldn't be able to dedicate to every painting. So I was trying to strike a balance between art that I was comfortable with and I knew I could create quite quickly, versus art that I would find challenging, that would help me develop as an artist, but would eat up a lot of my time, and the paintings may not actually be that good. It was at this point that I decided to change tact, materials, and focus. I switched from my Himi gouache to my Winsor and Newton Gouache, which is my favorite gouache at the moment. And I switched the focus from merely creating a video of me painting for 10 hours to me painting for 10 hours, but also trying to develop artistically. So the initial reason why I wanted to use the Himi gouache was because you get so much gouache for such a reasonable price that I felt that the cost of my art materials wouldn't be a barrier to me actually painting freely and being loose and experimenting and messing around, because I would be able to remove that kind of concern of me wasting art supplies and actually just create without worrying about. I then started thinking about the fact that I had a unique opportunity to paint for 10, now 9 hours using any art supply. And I have art supplies that I love. I have art supplies that I enjoy. And instead, I was potentially choosing to use art supplies that I didn't want to use as much for the sake of cost when I already had the art supplies. I also wanted to kind of get out of this mindset of using my art supplies equals wasting my art supplies, and get comfortable with using the art supplies that I like, that I enjoy, because I deserve to use art supplies that I like, and you deserve to use art supplies that you like. And it is difficult, especially with like the economic times and everything, to disregard price completely, but I have the materials, and in fact I think I'm actually doing a disservice and potentially risking them going off by saving them until this unknown moment where I will feel good enough to actually paint with these art supplies. And I don't know if you can see a difference, but I could certainly feel a difference. I was enjoying the painting process a lot more, and not to say that the pictures were easier or that the paintings were necessarily objectively better, but for me, I started enjoying the process a lot more. So I want this to be a reminder to you that you deserve to use your art supplies. Your art skills are almost certainly better than you think that they are. And even if they are not, you still deserve to use the art supplies that you want. You still deserve to use the art supplies that you enjoy, and that I deserve to do the same. Some tips that I wish I had employed before I did this challenge and that I learned through it, that I want to share with you in case you want to do the same or you want to apply it to your own art journey, is to, first of all, be intentional with the project. So determine what you want to get out of it. Is it that you just want to have fun and you want to paint? Is it that you want to get familiar with a particular medium? Is it that you want to get better at painting landscapes or painting portraits or getting noses, or whatever it is that you want to do? It is helpful if you know that that's what you're planning beforehand. And it may be that through the challenge, what you want to do and what you want to get changes, and that's completely fine. But at least as a starting point, I'm not saying anyone should aim for perfection, and I think that practice makes progress, but I would take it a step further and say that it's actually targeted practice that makes progress. So if your aim is to make progress, then make this intentional and make it targeted practice. The next thing that can make a big difference is prepping, and different people will need different amounts of preparation. But for me, as I've alluded to in the past, I can spend so long looking for references, and I really wanted to spend the 10 hours that I had painting, creating, drawing, whatever it was that I was going to do. What I didn't want to do is to dedicate maybe 3 hours of it looking for reference photos, which was a true possibility. So anticipate potential challenges that you may have within it and tackle it beforehand if you can. The way that I tackled this was by going into one of my reference folders and just accepting that I was going to start from the beginning and work my way down. I wasn't going to look through the folder and pick which painting I was going to do. In fact, I didn't even know what painting would be coming through next because I didn't skim through the folder either. I just started from one end and worked my way through, knowing that at some point I loved these pictures or I found them inspiring, and thus they were more than good enough for the challenge. My focus was on improving painting them, not improving picking the references. This painting was so much fun to paint. It was challenging because it's using colours that I wasn't really familiar with. I was layering the wash heavier and heavier and heavier because, again, I wasn't quite sure how to do the background. But in the end, I really, really liked it, especially like the little pops of pinks and purples that I wouldn't have otherwise used. Another tip that I have based on a struggle that I was facing is especially relevant if you're trying to kind of have targeted, focused, intentional practice or an intentional time in your art, and that is to try and minimize distractions. Now, I normally love painting or sketching or drawing while doing something else, like I'll be multitasking and watching TV or watching a movie, but I knew that it would slow me down and I knew that it would divide my focus. I also knew that I didn't want to stay in complete silence and paint because I still wanted this to be like an enjoyable experience for me. And thus I went in the middle and I started listening to music. And it meant that I was able to enjoy what I was doing while also being able to focus. And I think that my art was better for it. There's plenty of kind of research already on the power of uninterrupted work, or deep work as they call it. And I kind of feel like that is what I was trying to get to. Creating Cute Art actually created a video where she was talking about the flow state and just kind of getting lost in your work. And this can be a great way to do that. Minimize distractions, set yourself some time, set yourself a goal, and then paint or create or do whatever it is that you want to do in a focused way. I'm not gonna lie, it was a challenge. It's not that I was bored because I was enjoying what I was doing, but it was almost like around the fact that I knew that I had to create for 10 hours, at some point I started kind of almost looking for distractions, like looking for things to do. It was just so unusual to sit down uninterrupted and continuously create. And I think at this point it had been 3 or 4 hours. To be perfectly honest, I think I started looking for distractions around the 1 hour mark. I wasn't used to dedicating time and focusing solely on my art. It was a complete change of pace, but avoiding distractions definitely helped me. I love these 2 paintings. I was so pleased with the way they turned out, especially like the depth in the forest and trying to convey something that to me initially looked quite complicated and overwhelming using simple shapes. But then I wanted to loosen up again, and I already said I was struggling with like finding distractions and I was getting a little bit restless, so I brought out my Holbein and Co watercolors, which were kindly gifted to me by a wonderful subscriber, and I decided to do some loose florals again to, you know, get in the flow. And also I think in part I had the clock right in front of me so I could see the time running by, and I wanted to catch up on the time that I had perhaps lost. After doing the watercolor florals, I decided to try and do some gouache florals because I haven't done them in a very long time, years probably, but I always like the look of others having done them, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to try them out. So I tried the first one and I was so happy that I decided to do another loose floral. This one I thought was okay, but I didn't really love. And then the most humbling of them all was painting 12. There is something so humbling about the ugly phase of a gouache painting. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist in every other kind of medium. I think it does. But my goodness, when I hit the ugly phase of a gouache painting, and you will see many in this video, it's something special. Have you ever experienced the ugly phase of a painting or of your work? I find that every single piece I create has an ugly phase and I have to push through, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Having been thoroughly humbled with the last florals and having loosened up, I then went back to doing landscapes. And for this, I really wanted like a very loose, very abstract painting. And I was so happy because I kind of felt like I managed to achieve that. It felt odd because I wasn't using that much color, there wasn't that much detail, and I was really trying to focus on simplification and looking at the main shapes that I was seeing. And that is something that I've really been trying to focus on and to work on. And that's the power of simplification, looking at the big shapes, looking at what I am seeing, trying to simplify them rather than painting what I think should be, or getting engrossed in details way too soon. So for this, for example, and for all my paintings, you'll notice that a lot of the time I will block in the main colors and try to resist my natural inclination, sometimes more successfully than others, to start putting in extra details or extra colors that shouldn't be there. So initially block colors, a nice thin layer of gouache, and then with each subsequent layer I add more paint and less water and start adding more and more details. A key thing that I've seen reiterated and that I'm also trying to put into practice is being aware of the power of values. So focusing on my lights and my darks to make sure that I can bring the painting together nicely. So you'll see that a lot of the time I will start adding like really dark darks. With gouache, the color shifts, which means that as they dry, they change. Darker colors get lighter and lighter colors get darker. So I keep reassessing the painting and adding darker shadows where necessary and adding highlights where necessary. In a painting like a forest where there's a lot of greens and a lot of browns and a lot of similar colors, I think this bears even more importance, and a good way to assess it is to take a picture of your work, turn it into black and white, and to just see what the painting looks like. Do you have a good range of grays, or do you just have the same? It's less about colors and more about the tonal values, your darks and your lights. I am still very much a work in progress, but I really like the way that these two paintings turned out. They're completely different, but I felt like they were still able to convey exactly what I wanted them to, with a lot of details on the left, but not being overwhelming, and having motion and freedom on the right. And so I felt encouraged and inspired to continue creating and continue painting. My initial plan was to try and do it in 2 5-hour sessions, but I didn't want to stop yet. I didn't feel like I had quite done enough yet, and I felt like I was improving and getting better results, and I wanted to keep that momentum, and thus I continued painting. One of the challenges with trying to record all of this, which I have done in real time as well, is that I then had to put everything on my computer, go back and forth. So the timings themselves on the clock won't necessarily make sense, but that is why I have added the hour 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, so on and so forth. Though different, again, I really liked the kind of desert savanna that I painted on the right. And as I mentioned, I didn't know what pictures would come next when I was doing these paintings. So it was one after the other, but I think that they worked out well. In case you were wondering, I didn't have the luxury of time, and thus I wasn't allowing the paints to dry fully before turning the page, which is why I would always paint on the right first and then go onto the left so that I could paint freely and not worry about messing up the paintings that came before it. I hope that makes sense. Whereas the last painting was quite put together in terms of like very clean lines to depict the landscape, with this one I was really playing around with moving the brush very fast, using the dry brush technique to get some textures within the actual painting, and I loved the dry brush in the streams, which I end up playing with in other paintings as well, especially when trying to depict movement in water. I now felt satisfied that I could stop and pick up again the next day. Let me be honest, because we're all friends here, day 2 was even harder. just in terms of like concentrating, I found it so hard to concentrate. At this point, I told myself that I was going to allow myself to watch TV as I was painting. So I did watch TV series as I was doing this. And I think it was in part because my priorities were different in terms of when I started the challenge, I really wanted to finish a sketchbook at all costs. And at this point in the challenge, I just wanted to really evolve in my landscape paintings, to play around with brushwork, play around with color mixing, to get comfortable using the Winsor and Newton paints and use them freely. And thus I was more focused on enjoying myself and developing than actually getting the number of paintings and pages done. I still had it in my mind that I wanted it to, I wanted to do more paintings and I wanted to do as many as possible, but I also really wanted to enjoy the process because I just haven't had 10 hours or 5 hours or however many hours to paint continuously in a very, very, very long time. I can't even remember the last time that I have, and thus, it may have been, I think the last time that I did that was during my live stream, my birthday live stream. And so I gave myself some grace. I removed the clock from being right in front of me because it was just an additional stress factor that was unnecessary. I set an alarm so that I would know when my time would be up, and I made my way through my inspiration folder. As I've already alluded to, I like to start my paintings by doing a nice background of the main colors, and then I start adding details, focusing on adding the darkest areas first and then the lightest areas, and each time reassessing because gouache will change color. With foliage especially, I like using lots of different greens, adding a bit of red to mute it down, and also just adding like imperfect brush strokes to make it look rough and organic. I love a satisfying tape peel. Now, when looking at the paintings, in this one, I was really playing around with muting down my colors and using complementary colors to create different greens. Whereas with the next one, I started playing around with the dry brush effect again. The next two paintings I really struggled with, and I think it's because with these ones I was trying to focus on lights and shadows, and I was really struggling to, I guess, depict that correctly. I was using the same colors that I had been using for all the other paintings, so I started making them unintentionally muddy because I was over mixing. And though I liked the results in the end, it did take a lot of work, and they are, I guess, pieces that I would like to go back to one day to see if my ability to capture light has since improved. Especially with painting 20, I felt that if I had dedicated more time to it, I could improve it, but also I just wanted to continue. I'd gotten the lessons that I needed and I wanted to move on. In addition to many things, I think that painting for 10 hours with my Winsor and Newton gouache definitely helped me get more comfortable with painting with gouache and with painting with a supply that I hold dear. And as well as putting it in my Stay Wet palette, as you know, it just makes it so easy to carry. I don't have to worry about pouring out more paint that I need. And this again is another thing that really gave me some more freedom to play around with these paints. And I wasn't devastated like I thought that I would be if I created a piece of art that I wasn't completely in love with, having used art supplies that I was really precious about. If you're still watching, then you are most definitely a real MVP. And though I haven't finished the video yet, I thought it would be nice to say hi in a random point so that I can know the truest of the true MVPs. If you are still watching, then say Waterfall in the comments so that I know that you have made it this far into the video. I picked Waterfall because they were one of the favorite things that I loved to paint during this challenge. Feel free to also let me know what your 10-hour challenge would look like. What would you decide to paint or to draw? What subject and what mediums would you use? I'm really curious to see what your own thought process would be behind doing this kind of challenge. I ultimately really enjoyed it. As a result of it, I was able to dedicate a specific amount of time to creating. And though I know that initially my aim was to finish a sketchbook, towards the end it was just to improve artistically. It was just to dedicate time to my art, dedicate time to painting and to improving in something that I have wanted to do for a long time. And I had so much fun. With each painting, I was experimenting with different things. So for example, with this one, I wanted to have have one side that was backlit with one side that had the rays of sunshine on it. With other paintings, I was focusing on using brushwork to depict movement. With some paintings, I was just using dry brush effect and trying to get textures on my painting. So I did a lot of things that I think I wouldn't have been able to do were it not for like cumulative practice, were it not for the fact that I was painting for so long. I am so used to doing multiple things at once that I just couldn't get into that flow state of just getting lost in my work. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy it, but I was very mindful of the fact that I was trying to get something out of what I was doing. I was trying to learn something and play and experiment. That being said, I do feel like as a result, I did notice a tangible improvement in my skills, not only in my speed, but in being able to compose, in being able to use brush strokes effectively, using different types of brush strokes, as well as color mixing, because ultimately I was creating forests and landscapes, so it involved using a lot of greens, and I needed to face the challenge of being able to mix all these greens but also have enough variation that my artwork wouldn't look flat or boring or dull, and I think I achieved that. This is in fact one of my favorite spreads in this entire sketchbook. If you have seen my very first YouTube video, which was my first ever sketchbook tour, then you will know that I love painting water. And so at this point, I knew that I didn't have much long left and I could get one, maybe two paintings done. So I thought it would be lovely to look back on my Malta views, which is my ebook that I created with reference photos from my time in Malta, and essentially pick one of those reference photos to really remember the amazing time that I had there and to paint the water that I saw. I'll link my Malta video as well as the link to my ebooks down below in the description in case you're also interested in watching that or you want to have those references. I have found that something that is beautiful to see isn't always, for me, beautiful to paint or nice to paint or easy to paint. So it's been a real intricate balance putting together these guides. Now, for the last painting, I only had a few minutes, so I knew that it couldn't be too detailed, but I really wanted to paint a beautiful forest to just tie in everything that I have learnt and experienced. One of the beautiful things about doing a challenge that is so long is that by the end you just want it done. Like, I was so excited to get to the finish line. Part of me couldn't even believe that I had made it this far and painted continuously for so long, and I really wasn't sure if I should call it a day without doing this painting, especially as when I started it, I think because I was tired and I was layering heavily, it wasn't going the way that I wanted it to go. But towards the end, I managed to turn it all around, and all in all, I really enjoyed this challenge. Like, I learned so much, and also it was just fun to spend time dedicated to art. I had tried doing a similar challenge in the past, but I just couldn't concentrate and get through it to the end. Whereas with this one, because I knew it was a collaboration, there was a bit more of an onus and a bit more pressure on it, which is part of the reason why it was successful. So I really enjoyed it, and I hope that you've enjoyed watching it too. I am so curious to know your thoughts, and I will be eagerly awaiting in the comments. If you have made it this far into the video, then you are a real MVP, and I really appreciate you. Let me know that you're still watching by telling me which of the paintings was your favorite and which one you would like to see a longer video of, and the answers don't necessarily need to be the same. I am super curious to know about your thoughts on this challenge, if you've done something similar or if you're going to try it out yourself. And if you do decide to do so, then use the hashtag 10-hour challenge so that we can all see it as well. My Instagram is at Sketches.n.Scrubs. You can always feel free to hit me up on there. A special thank you to Miranda from Miranda Watson at Alkali Creek Art for bringing us all together. Don't forget to check out all the other amazing artists who have also taken part, whose videos I have linked down below in the description. A special thank you to all my Ko-fi members. Thank you so much for keeping the channel running. Thank you so much for encouraging me in my art journey. If you're looking for more references and you want to take part and paint the same paintings that I have painted, then check out the PDF that I'll link down below in the description. But if you want to see more content like this, check out the videos that I'll link for you at the end. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week. Bye.